Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I am Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and it is my great pleasure today to welcome you to Data Security for a Remote Workforce, how to keep your business moving forward while protecting your company's critical data in the age of the remote workforce. Obviously, a very timely concern for all of us, and we are very proud to have this webinar sponsored by First Light. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today, who is Aaron Sawchuk. Aaron is the Senior Vice President of Data Center and Cloud for First Light, and he's responsible for helping to drive the growth and success of the data center and cloud business at First Light. He has more than 25 years of industry experience and joined First Light through the acquisition of ColoSpace, where he served as co-founder and chairman. ColoSpace was the leading provider of data center and managed cloud services in New England. Prior to founding ColoSpace, Aaron was the founder of Dream Communications, a small business-focused ISP in the Metro Boston market. He has a degree in economics from Middlebury College. So, Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Ernesto. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning.
And on that note, Aaron, I'm gonna turn my camera off for a while and listen to you as you walk through this, and then I will be back to moderate some questions for the audience out there. Please do note that you can enter questions into the GoToWebinar interface, and we will try to get to as many as we can when Aaron has brought us through the core of his presentation here. So I will see you all shortly.
Thanks again. So by way of an agenda this morning, I'm going to start with some brief introductions to let you know a little bit more about myself and about First Light. And then we're going to dig right into what we call the new normal, or America 2.0. Talk about some of the things that we've learned over the last 3 months, both as an organization as well as talking to many of our customers as they seek to think about how they're going to operate their business on a go-forward basis and how they can protect themselves and their remote workers. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the evolving threat landscape, not just what's happened within the last 3 months, but within the last year. And then finally end with some strategies on how organizations today can protect their data, their applications, and their people. We'll wrap things up with a Q&A. And as Ernesto mentioned, you can enter those questions at any time, and we'll get to as many of them as the time allots. So as a brief introduction, as Ernesto mentioned, I joined First Light about 6 months ago. I had led ColoSpace for almost 20 years prior to that, working with organizations large and small throughout New England, helping them really develop their IT strategy and implement that IT strategy as it pertains to data center, cloud, and managed services. I'm I was a hands-on leader and focused really on trying to help our customers solve their business problems, as it says here, not a sales guy. So in terms of First Light, many of you may be familiar with us as an organization. We were founded, again, almost more than 20 years ago, with some of the original roots going back a century, offering telecommunications services throughout the Northeast. We're owned by Antin Infrastructure Partners. We have a very strong financial profile with more than 15,000 customers throughout the region, more than 20,000 miles of fiber optic connectivity throughout New York, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts, and 15 different data center / co-location facilities throughout the region with more than 150,000 square feet of usable space. So we are a significant presence within the marketplace and really have been delivering these solutions for quite some time. As far as our network goes, and we think that our network is integral to the types of services that we go, it is one of the largest networks and certainly the fastest growing network in the Northeast. So we go as far north as Montreal, as far west as the northernmost reaches and westernmost reaches of Maine, I'm sorry, as east, and then the easternmost reaches of upstate New York and Pennsylvania. From a service portfolio perspective, I'm going to talk about a couple of these services as they pertain to the topic today, but really a full-fledged suite of managed cloud and data center services. This slide is really intended to just give an overview of the depth and breadth of our capabilities, really ranging from traditional cloud compute, data center colocation, to a full suite of managed cloud services. So let's talk about the new normal for a moment. When we talk about the new normal, a lot of us as business leaders have learned quite a bit over the last 3 months, and yet we still have a lot more to learn about what the future may hold. I think many of us as leaders were not necessarily expecting what happened to happen, but as leaders, we took the bull by the horns and put in place solutions that worked for our businesses to keep them up and running. At this point, we really need to reflect upon what does the future hold and how can we make sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that our organizations are secured and our people are safe. So the first paradigm that I'm going to talk about is how do we support a permanent remote workforce? I know that our organization literally overnight moved hundreds of folks from on-premise locations into work from home models throughout the region as we responded to both the pandemic as well as the restrictions on economic activity. And we learned quite a bit ourselves, but also learned quite a bit from our customers. And within that idea of supporting a permanent remote workforce, how do we make sure folks can work from home, can work from remote offices, and yet make sure that our apps, our data are secure and safeguarded? And then secondly, how do we protect our remote users from the security threats that may be more common in a work from home environment than in an environment within the corporate setting where we have more control over what's being done and how infrastructure is hardened? And then the second paradigm I'm going to talk about this morning is reimagining the office environment. And so both us as an organization, but also as we talk to our thousands of customers, the one constant message we're hearing is tomorrow is not going to be the same as yesterday. And one of the hallmarks that we're hearing from all of our customers is the need for greater flexibility. With that unknown of the future means it's much more difficult to make long-term decisions, particularly with respect to how we're going to house our employees, how they're going to operate, and how we can make sure they can do so in the most secure fashion. The second element of reimagining the office is a trend that we're seeing accelerate, which is separating IT infrastructure from people infrastructure. There's a traditional model where the corporate headquarters would house a data center facility, and that's where most of a corporation's data applications lived. We saw a trend starting a few years ago with the push to the cloud and the push to an outsourced data center model, but we saw that rapidly accelerate due to the current pandemic and the idea of not necessarily wanting to tie our IT infrastructure to where our people physically sit. And then finally, one of the more significant trends we've seen very recently is a desire to reduce the amount of third parties who are accessing our facilities, accessing our offices, and reducing the amount of third-party touch points as we seek to contain the risk associated with the pandemic, but also assess other risks that come from having third parties accessing our infrastructure physically. So the new normal, a few headlines from the last week. Facebook is shifting permanently towards a remote workforce. IT executives are refocusing their efforts and refocusing their emphasis towards supporting the remote worker as opposed to hardening an internal IT infrastructure. And then finally, organizations large and small are rethinking their office footprint. Does everyone need to go to the office every day? Is it feasible for everyone to go to the office every day? And if not, how do we make sure that all of those individuals can continue to do their job day in and day out as easily and as efficiently as possible? So as we think about safeguarding our apps, one of the things that we talk to our customers about a lot is that when you're putting in place systems, putting in place capabilities, you need to recognize that your users, your employees, and your customers need to be able to do their job as easily and reliably as if they were in an office setting. They need to have access to the tools, they need to do their job, and if they don't have access and it isn't easy, they're going to find workarounds. the phenomenon of shadow IT is one that emerged several years ago, but the idea being if individuals are not being suitably supported by their IT organization, they're going to find their own solution. According to Gartner, shadow IT now represents 30 to 40% of an overall IT spend within large enterprises, and many large enterprises and CIOs have no idea what services are being leveraged, what data is where. The NTT survey found that 83% of IT professionals are reporting that employees are storing corporate data on unsanctioned cloud workspaces. Why do they do this? It's because their needs are not being sufficiently catered to by their internal organization. Applications that are difficult to use, that require multiple steps, that don't offer the same performance as today's modern cloud services are going to be avoided. And if we as organization leaders don't put in the effort and make the investments to give that user the experience as if they're sitting within the four walls of our office, they're going to resort to these unauthorized, unsanctioned shadow IT services. And that dramatically increased risk for the organization because, frankly, if you don't know where your data is, you can't possibly secure it. And so at the end of the day, if you can't make it easy, reliable, and flexible, your users, regardless of your policies, are going to find workarounds, and that's going to introduce greater risk to your organization. The second element of supporting a permanent workforce is protecting your remote users. So according to a recent survey by IDG, 60% of employees use a personal device to perform their job. If you were to survey the same organizations today, it's probably dramatically larger, a significantly larger percentage, because people literally overnight went from working from a corporate environment to working from home. With that, it presents risk. And the primary risk is your IT organization, your security organization has not done assessments of your employees' Wi-Fi, of their desktops or their personal devices. It's totally unfeasible to go to 100 employees' homes to make sure that they're using the appropriate technology and security mechanisms to make sure that when they log into your systems, they're doing so in a secure fashion. For example, a Kaspersky survey at the end of 2019, 25% of Wi-Fi networks globally have no password or encryption of any kind, which dramatically increases the risk of different types of data capture and infiltration as your users log into your systems, access proprietary data, or input data into internal systems. 47% of malware infections are infected due to one thing, and that is infected Microsoft Office attachments. Think about how many times you've been emailed an attachment in the last 3 months because you weren't able to easily access an internal file server or other resource. So half of the incidents of malware are related to people sending, perhaps unintentionally, infected Microsoft Office attachments. And then finally, according to a 2018 survey, Microsoft determined that 25% of Windows workstations have either expired or no antivirus protection of any kind. So even if you have the best of intentions and expect your employees to use antivirus, if it's expired or not installed, they're at significant risk to malware, if for no other reason than that prior statistic of those infected Office documents. And so it's incredibly important to be able to make the investments in technology and services and capabilities to make sure your remote users are protected, given the fact that they are probably introducing risk to your organization. So to pivot to the next paradigm of reimagining the office, we saw, starting, I would say about 2 years ago, the acceleration of co-working spaces. And the concept behind co-working, besides the community that it builds, was flexibility. What we're seeing today is there's even a greater need for flexibility. Organizations today are hard-pressed to know what their headcount is going to be a year from now, let alone 5 or 10 years from now if committing to a long-term office lease. That flexibility is needed for things like office layout, lease terms, as well as overall space consumption. So you might need to ramp up space seasonally, or ramp up space based on economic or environmental conditions. Now that presents a significant challenge for organizations that have a large on-premise IT infrastructure. Over the last 3 months, we have transitioned several organizations into our data center simply because they needed to exit a large office space that housed their IT infrastructure. They no longer needed or no longer could afford the space they were taking down. But that IT infrastructure on site served as an anchor. It forced them to maintain that presence as long as that infrastructure was on site. Now, beyond reducing their flexibility with the actual office space, it presented other problems. So many of our clients experienced capacity constraints. So as they needed to support a greater number of remote users over the last 3 months, they didn't necessarily have the compute, storage, or network capacity to do so. So those challenges are exacerbated when you have a fixed on-premise infrastructure, as opposed to when you're utilizing a cloud service or outsourced data center service where you can rapidly scale or burst up or burst down in terms of overall capacity availability. The second element of the on-premise infrastructure that we've seen is you simply can't assume that you're going to be able to support that infrastructure and have the staff to do so. If employees aren't allowed or are unwilling to come to the office, who's going to replace that hard disk or reboot that server or make other upgrades necessary to support your organization? And so by having your IT infrastructure tied to your office, which may or may not be accessible, it's producing greater risk when and if you experience a failure. And then finally, one of the significant challenges that we've seen over the last 3 months is organizations that don't want third parties to access their on-premise infrastructure. So that might be someone that needs to come on site to upgrade your network connection, or a vendor that's providing break-fix support. Many of our clients had formal and strict policies restricting any non-employee or non-essential employee from accessing their organization's office. And so how do you support your IT if you can't come on site? And at this point, I'm going to pivot to the evolving threat landscape. So as we think about the threats over the last several years, we've seen a number of different trends. One is the rapid rise of distributed denial of service attacks. Now, for many, they may say, well, I'm not a high-profile target. Why is someone going to launch a DDoS attack on me? Why is someone going to try to shut down my infrastructure? Well, one of the trends that we're seeing is DDoS is actually a distraction. They're trying to shut down your network so that they can exploit it or take advantage of it. And so while you're out fighting one fire, the attackers are going in the back door to steal or access your data. We saw a significant uptick in ransomware associated with the coronavirus. Much of this was associated with those workers who are working from home and might not have the same security protections, or may have fallen down on their training associated with not opening that attachment or not clicking on that link. We saw countless incidents where we would get phishing emails, and it's the CEO, can you give me a call? Can you text me my password? Now, ordinarily, you'd walk down to his office and say, why did you send me a text? But the reality is you can't walk down the hall if everyone's working from home. And then finally, the rise of nation state or foreign actors trying to exploit US technology. We've seen a significant number of attempts specifically with the coronavirus research, but research of all kinds. And so we're now not just focusing on keeping out someone who has a profit motive, but also someone who has geopolitical ambitions, which dramatically raises the stake. It's one thing to try to prevent a hacker who has a financial motive. It's entirely another to try to go against an entire nation state. The other element that we're seeing, and this is simply accelerating as we move to a more distributed model, is originally it was easy to protect the enterprise. You focus on that internal bubble, which was the servers and data that were sitting within your corporate data center. Well, now, as I mentioned, your data is everywhere. It's on your employees' devices. It's within various clouds. It's within your remote employees' computers, partner portals, etc. And so as your data sprawls, so does the potential for exploiting that with that expanding attack surface. And so organizations have to take a more comprehensive view to how they're protecting their data. So rather than focusing on the network edge, the firewall, antivirus, email, much more effort is necessary in order to reduce your risk and improve your overall ability to detect and respond to security incidents. And that can be everything from that external incident or your internal lone wolf who is going to exploit systems internally. So a comprehensive view and comprehensive and holistic approach to security is one that's going to provide you with the most protection and mitigate the most risk. So how do we mitigate that risk? At First Light, we came up with 4 areas where we're focusing on in this America 2.0 new normal. One is the concept of liberating your infrastructure. The second is bolstering the protections at the network edge. The third is increasing your visibility and response to security incidents. And the final is boosting the overall resiliency and the ability to recover in the event that you do have an incident. So what do we mean by liberating your infrastructure? What we mean there is we're now at a point where it makes less and less sense to have a single consolidated data center within a corporate internal data center environment. We believe that organizations can reap significant benefits by leveraging outsourced services, and usually a combination of services of things like outsourced data center, cloud, software as a service, platform as a service. Our vision for the future is our organizations that work with us, our clients, believe in a hybrid infrastructure. So again, rather than that single consolidated view, one solution for every need, it's about matching the appropriate solution to the underlying characteristics of that workload, both the technical characteristics as well as the business requirements. So the advantages of taking that approach is you can scale endlessly, both on the compute, storage, and network, but also the other inputs and capacity constraints that can take place within an internal infrastructure. You can leverage your partners' engineers for on-site support. So eliminate that issue of having to have third parties or your own internal staff come to your internal facilities when those facilities may not be accessible, or having those individuals on site may introduce a significant amount of risk either for your organization or for their own health. And then finally, we're seeing more and more organizations benefit by deploying virtual desktop infrastructure or desktop as a service to eliminate the dependence on your employees to have a comprehensive, secure, hardened device in their mobile environment, whether that be a mobile workforce or work from home. So how does First Light help our clients liberate their infrastructure? The first is with our network of data centers. As I mentioned, 15 facilities throughout the northeastern United States. All of those facilities are audited by third-party auditors as part of an SSA 18 SOC 2 audit. So you understand that we're doing everything that we should be, following all the appropriate policies, procedures, and controls. They're all engineered with the maximum amount of redundancy. So things like multiple generators, UPS battery backup systems, redundancy across all of the critical systems. They have access to a variety of different telecommunications and cloud on-ramps, so we can help organizations enable that hybrid IT strategy where they can leverage a variety of different service providers from one single location. And then finally, we allow our customers to scale their infrastructure as they see fit. So in the example of this pandemic, we were able to allow organizations to rapidly add network capacity, rapidly add storage or compute capacity to meet their needs. The second element or second service that we offer to help our clients liberate their infrastructure is that VDI that I spoke to. And what VDI really is it's taking the last element of your IT infrastructure, the individual desktop, tablet, or workstation, and moving it to the cloud. There are significant advantages of this, and this is a service that we've been offering for the last several years, but have certainly seen an accelerated interest due to the current work from home environment. The primary advantages of the DAS or VDI solutions are they allow an organization to control their security posture, to set policies, to set procedures, and set controls, to make sure that someone is not using a home PC that their kids might be using for school and accidentally download malware or introduce malware or virus into the network. So while those desktops can be accessed from any device, all of your data sits within the data center, and according to your security parameters, none of that data is ever downloaded to your employee's device sitting within their home. So it truly allows you to offer that employee all of the functionality that they have and they're accustomed to working in the office, but from home in a highly secure way. So the second risk mitigation strategy that we talk about is protecting the network edge. Now, organizations have been focused on protecting the network edge for some time now, but what we're seeing is greater and better next generation firewalls that provide not just the advanced firewall protection, but things like antivirus and anti-malware, URL filtering at the network edge. So keep that bad traffic out before it ever enters your network, whether it's coming from your individual employees or an outside third-party actor. Anti-DDoS protection today is essential to make sure that organizations' infrastructure stays up, online, and accessible to their employees, even in the event that they're being attacked. And then finally, advanced VPN and SD-WAN technologies that allow employees to securely access their infrastructure wherever it sits within the world. And even if they are on one of those Wi-Fi hotspots that's one of the 25% that's not encrypted or doesn't have a password, providing an additional layer of encryption and security so that they cannot be intercepted and they cannot be compromised by virtue of connecting into your secure network. The third paradigm that I talked about is increasing visibility. So one of the challenges that we hear a lot from our customers and prospective customers is, you know what, we think the network edge is hardened, but what's going on within the network? Once that employee VPN's in, how can I be sure that they're accessing only the resources that they need to access? Or if a VPN were to be compromised, how do I very quickly determine that? And so the way that you address that issue and have the maximum visibility and the ability to respond as quickly as possible is to take a continuously monitoring approach for internal and external IT. So First Light offers what we call SOCAS, or Security Operations Center as a Service, that provides maximum visibility by monitoring as many endpoints, devices, and infrastructure points within your network as possible. And that could be devices at your employees' homes. It could be infrastructure that's deployed in our cloud or one of the other hyperscale cloud providers. Wherever you have data, we monitor and report. And then finally, and most critically, the service is a combination of people, process, and technology. And the most critical element there, in my opinion, is the people. So you can go out and buy an IPS IDS system. You can implement log monitoring. You can have a SIM. But if you don't have the skilled people monitoring that on a 24/7 by 365 basis, inevitably something is going to be missed. So what SOCAS does is allow employees or organizations to immediately detect, then contain, and then remediate IT issues. Even with all of the investments that we're talking about today, many of you will still have a security incident. And so what SOCAS does is recognize that fact, that it may be an if, maybe a when instead of an if, and therefore we need to be positioned to, once that incident occurs, immediately detect it, contain it, and remediate it. And then finally, as we think about risk mitigation, the last point that we talk about is boosting resiliency and recoverability. So in that same vein of SOCAS, if it is a when and not an if you experience some kind of security incident, the most critical investment you can make is the ability to recover from that. So we recommend that all of our clients deploy a data protection strategy. And what that means is you're backing up your data, your applications, everything that's critical to your business, regardless of where it sits, whether it's on-premise in an outsourced data center or cloud or platform as a service provider, backing it up and storing it offsite. So if you were to experience ransomware, malware, you can rapidly recover the data. The second key element of the resiliency and recoverability is disaster recovery and business continuity. So while it's critically important to have your data backed up, we also recommend that our clients put themselves in a position where they can rapidly recover those applications as quickly as possible. So rather than taking hours or days or weeks to recover from a backup, installing it on new infrastructure, getting that infrastructure up and running, we recommend clients leverage cloud-based disaster recovery so that when and if they're struck, within 15 minutes, they can be back up online and accessible to their users. That's going to give them the maximum ability to recover and mitigate the risk associated with these ransomware or malware attacks. So First Light offers what we call cloud disaster recovery. And what Cloud DR offers is first that data protection. So local and offsite data backup. Data is backed up to a local data collector and then replicated out of region. Second, we provide standby compute resources that can be rapidly leveraged when and if you need to spin up those machines. That combination of the offsite backup and the standby cloud compute resources allows our customers to recover their infrastructure in as little as 15 minutes. The final element of this solution, and regardless of how you implement DR, whether it's with a First Light solution or some other internal led solution, the most critical element of success for DR is testing. And so with our Cloud DR product, we provide free use of the environment every 90 days for testing and compliance purposes. So you have that certification that you know that when and if you experience a disaster, you'll be able to recover. Now, when we talk about disaster recovery to our customers, many of them are anticipating the 100-year flood, the pandemic, a fire, the proverbial nuclear blast. But the reality is more than 75% of our clients who have failed over into DR have done so because of a security incident, typically malware, ransomware, or some other security incident that have left their systems unusable. And so that's why, as people think about disaster recovery, it's something that is as much an investment as security as it is in overall business resiliency. So in summary, as organizations adjust to the new normal, they can benefit greatly from migrating their on-premise infrastructure into cloud, data center, or other as-a-service offerings. That is especially highlighted as they embrace more and more remote users and want to restrict access to their production infrastructure. As threats to the organizations evolve, it becomes more and more challenging to address those threats when you're relying entirely on internal and on-premise equipment. It's very difficult to scale. It's very difficult to protect yourself from threats like denial of service, malware, etc. Organizations can reduce risk and improve user experience, and that's a virtuous cycle. As I mentioned earlier, if your users have a poor experience when they're working from home, they're going to introduce more risk into your network and into your organization. So by utilizing new services that are delivered in unique ways that allow you to scale and increase performance as needed, you will deliver a higher quality user experience, and as a result, you will reduce the amount of risk from things like shadow IT or data sprawl. And then finally, First Light has more than 20 years experience offering these solutions to our clients. And yet we also continue to invest. We have rolled out several new products over the last 12 months and will continue to do so, both as the evolving threat, as the overall threats evolve, but also as the workplace of the future continues to change. The only thing we know about the future is it will be different than today. And so we work with organizations to continue to fine tune our service offering to make sure we continue to stay relevant to their needs. So with that, I would love to turn things over to the questions.
Okay, and I am back with that as well. So thank you so much. That was informative and a little bit nerve-wracking as somebody who's managing a remote workforce right now. So I think we certainly do have some questions. And one of the first ones that came in early on, and I'll do this one first because I think that you touched on it, but maybe you could expand on it a little bit, is that the question was, isn't it best to have your data in 3 spaces, on-prem, cloud, and off-prem? And if I'm remembering correctly, you had talked about cloud-based DR solutions being a fraction of the cost of having a second production environment. So where do you come down on that? 3 environments or 2?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that the sort of traditional 3-2-1 model of production, backup, and DR certainly is has been the best in class for some time now. I think the trend that we've seen accelerate over the last several months, and as we forecast 2020 and 2021, is that primary location is moving from a corporate IT business, corporate IT environment within an office to either an outsourced data center or cloud service. But you're absolutely right. It's critically important to not just have your data in the cloud and assume that it's being backed up and protected, or have it be in a co-located model and have it and assume that it's being protected. So I think that's a spot on observation.
Okay. Let's see. Another question that has come in. This one is, how small of a business are your services economically reasonable for? Or I guess that, yeah, how big of a business do you have to be to afford the kind of services that you're talking about?
You know, that's a great question. And one of the things that I really like about the cloud model in particular is you can start small, but you can scale infinitely. And so one of the trends we see with virtual desktops, for example, is an organization might say, I want to run a test. I want my mobile sales force, which is 10 employees, to start with this. Let's see how it goes. And then if it's successful, I'm going to run it enterprise-wide. And so that's one example. But in terms of the overall solution set, we've tried to deliberately make our solution relevant to businesses of all sizes. Now, some of our, so we have thousands of small business clients, but we also have many of the largest enterprises in the Northeast. So I would say the great thing about cloud is you can start small, but if it's successful and takes off, you can scale it infinitely.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions here about virtual desktops. To start with, we know virtual desktops have existed for some time, yet you said there's been a tremendous amount of new interest. Is all of that new interest tied to the current work from home situation, or do you think that it goes beyond that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We've been talking about, people have been using virtual desktops, if you think about sort of dumb terminals, for the last 40 years. I think the big difference with what's happened today is a combination of, yes, the pandemic is absolutely driving interest, but the other significant thing that's changed over the last, I would say, 24 months is technology has caught up, and it's all about performance. And so in our experience, I can tell you within a day if a client's proof of concept with VDI is going to be successful or not. And the thing that's going to drive success is if that user forgets they're on a virtual desktop. In other words, the experience is as if they're sitting in their office using an application on a locally installed PC. And if we can deliver that level of experience, then it's going to be wildly successful. And the way we do that with the way technology has changed is, one, quality of service has dramatically improved. So we are a Citrix partner, and they continue to innovate and invest in making that user experience great. And I think the second thing is certain elements of the technology stack, specifically graphics acceleration, and secondly, solid state storage, has boosted the amount of performance available and reduced the bottlenecks associated with those elements of the technology stack, so we can give that user the experience that they desire. So it's a combination of business changing with the pandemic, but definitely technology has helped driving that.
So, and this question sort of comes from me out of personal experience with having teams work on remote desktop services for publishing in various organizations. I know that at least at some points, the performance of those has been partly contingent, it seemed like, on the actual, the amount of bandwidth that the employee had, their own data plan, for example.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if the improvements that you've talked about to the overall remote desktop experience sort of help mitigate some of the potential weakness in somebody's, connectivity.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it has. So I think one of the things that has really permeated within the networking stack is a combination of quality of service technologies as well as data compression and prioritization. So that has definitely made it so your user has a better experience even if they don't have the best internet connection. Honestly, the other thing that has helped is the advent and acceleration of deployment of broadband. So that definitely, a user on a broadband connection is going to have a better experience than what you're going to get on a dial-up connection. And so I think as broadband has become more ubiquitous, we've done our part with First Light building out 20,000 route miles. But as that's happened, it's definitely become more usable.
Yeah. Okay, and sort of piggybacking on that question, we have another question here from the audience. Have you seen specifically how virtual desktops can be used for software developers working from home who need a great deal of compute resources?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So we one of the early on use cases that we've deployed, where we've deployed virtual desktops, has been organizations that use offshore developers and want to retain a significant amount of control over what those individuals can do with respect to, they want to make sure their code can't walk out the door. So restricting printing, restricting file sharing, making sure that they can monitor the activities that are taking place, yet, to your point, still deploying a higher performance experience. And so we definitely have several use cases where we use things like the graphics acceleration, depending upon if it's graphics intensive development or simply you're compiling a lot of data, and that's where we solve that with a compute. But that's definitely a use case that we've seen an uptick on over the last couple of years.
Very cool. Going back to sort of a broader view, you mentioned early on that you have that there are lessons learned from your clients or lessons learned by your clients during the pandemic. And so without naming names, are there examples that you can point to in terms of, situations where a client wasn't able to respond as quickly as needed, or other pandemic specific situations?
Yeah, I think it really fits within two, sort of crystallize that into two spheres. One is the organizations that, quite frankly, did not have the ability to scale the capacity as quickly as they needed to. And so that was oftentimes network capacity. And so they were in a situation where they were used to having maybe 1% or 5% of their users logging in remotely, and all of a sudden 100% are. And so the way that we as First Light handled that is we put in place a system where we allowed organizations to very rapidly upgrade their services with us so that we could provision network capacity tasks that might have taken weeks in the past, we were turning around in hours or days. So that's sort of one element. I think the other area is organizations that perhaps were things like call centers, or organizations that felt like they really needed their employees to work from the office so they could monitor their performance and their productivity. And I can think of a couple examples of companies that said they would never embrace the work from home because they weren't confident that they could exert the management oversight to get the productivity they felt like they needed. And I can think of a couple of specific examples where they actually saw productivity improve. They saw hold times reduce because they provided their employees more flexibility. Those employees were happier. They weren't commuting. They were able to focus more of their effort on doing their job as opposed to getting to their job. And so I think it opened a lot of eyes for a lot of organizations that might have said 6 months ago, we're never going to be a virtual company. And today, maybe we're going to stay work from home forever.
Yeah, I think you must see different kinds of metrics being used across different kinds of companies to do that kind of management, right? You mentioned hold times as an example of one company, but do you see the companies who are your customers sort of evolving those key performance indicators, based on their own industries and being successful at it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when we talk about America 2.0, I think that is the challenge for leaders, for CIOs, as they look forward, is how do you not just give the organizations the tools they need, or the employees the tools they need to operate in this world, but how do you make sure they are efficient? How do you make sure they aren't burning out? And how do you put in place the systems to track that and utilize technology to help, not only your employees do your job, but also operate as efficiently as possible?
Yeah. Another question that has come in here, and this is one that I was wondering about too, from, again, something you brought up early on, was that, forget what the stat you gave, 60% of employees use personal devices to do their jobs. So the questioner had said, how do you protect cell phones, personal, that have had to adapt for work to be secure without a full intervention?
Yeah, honestly, that mobile device piece is one of the most challenging that we've seen within organizations as they sort of struggle to, maximize their employees' ability to do their job, yet also safeguard the data. And that's an area, again, where a VDI type solution, where you can containerize your data and it runs within an app on a phone or on a tablet or on a laptop, but nothing else within that device can interact with that data. So the data always lives on the server at First Light as opposed to on that actual device. I think the other thing, and it's a stat I didn't use, but if you look at mobile devices in general, the attack vectors for mobile devices within the mobile sphere between Android, iOS, etc., the vast majority of attacks that are successful are oriented towards Android devices. Now, that could also do with market share, but I think the key thing there is business leaders, as they establish their bring your own device policies, really need to understand what devices their employees are using and have a specific strategy to make sure that they're utilizing the appropriate security controls based on what types of devices users are using.
And do you think that those controls are important even for simple things? And I'm presuming maybe that I'm asking a silly question, but even for simple things like accessing your email,
Yeah, that's been one that I think a lot of organizations have struggled with. Many firms require a VPN, for example, to access an internal email system, which can be kludgy if you're trying to use a mobile device or maybe a device that's not built for that. But one of the trends, as I mentioned, with the malware-induced email attachments, but one of the trends that we saw an uptick in interest in is, how do you make sure employees aren't sending sensitive data via email? How do you deploy secure email so that, again, individuals can do their job, but if you lose your phone, you're not losing access to that data. And we've used technologies internally to be able to remotely wipe devices, to be able to cut off access from email. But that's going to be one of the ones that companies continue to struggle with, and not just email, but we're seeing in that same shadow IT world things like WhatsApp and Messenger and other applications that really are consumer applications, but people are using to do their job. And so it's going to be a challenge that IT faces for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. That seems like a problem that has been one that the military has faced, hasn't it, over the past couple of decades?
It is, yeah. Well, it depends on, yes, it is. And really, I think it's a combination of how do you allow, in the military, it's no different than the private sector, is how do you enable your individual users, whether those users are members of the military, the executive government, et cetera, or they're your team. How do you keep the communication safe and secure? And I think that, in some ways it goes back to the idea of it's not if, it's when, and that's where strong policies, procedures, and controls about what people are sending via email certainly can help pay off.
Okay. Now, another question that comes up is related to healthcare access and doctor's visits. This is something that I imagine, even as doctors' offices are opening back up, probably the increased reliance on telemedicine is not going to go away entirely. We'll continue to see that. So the questioner had wanted to know, how does having to meet HIPAA requirements affect IT models for?
This is one where we've spent a lot of effort. So healthcare is one of First Light's gold verticals. So we have a significant number of both providers of patient care as well as things like bioscience, health sciences companies. And so the current paradigm is the government has relaxed regulations on HIPAA for telemedicine as we figure out what does this mean on a go-forward basis. But this is critically important, and it's something that we have to solve on a go-forward basis, because we see an acceleration of telemedicine. And really, as you think about your traditional health systems, as they have deprioritized things like outpatient services or elective surgeries, they are facing a massive financial strain. And they need to embrace telemedicine because it will help drive revenue, but it will also help them care for their patients without putting them at risk for this virus or future pandemics. And so we think that healthcare organizations, large and small, will continue to invest in these capabilities. For the smallest practitioners, I think the trend is going to be going towards a HIPAA-compliant software as a service solution that will allow them to outsource that responsibility to a third party to make sure that everything's being done in a secure fashion. But for those mid-size, doctors, practices, hospitals, larger providers of patient care, outsourced outpatient services, the trend that we're seeing is they're generally deploying these within things like our cloud or leveraging an outsourced data center model. But that was a very long answer to we're really going to have to depend upon the government to set the guidelines because this is something that is fraught with risk. If a doctor's practice does not invest in the appropriate technology and they're seeing patients from home, then they're opening themselves up to significant liability. Much of the telemedicine that we've seen over the last 3 months has been providers of patient care working at their corporate facilities and seeing their patients when their patients are at home. But I think the trend is going to move towards getting them out of very expensive hospital spaces and into either a traditional office environment or even working from home. And when that transition occurs, security's got to be top of mind.
I can imagine, not only from the perspective of HIPAA and government regulations, but in order for telemedicine to really be successful, I think the general public has to have a sense that it's secure, because otherwise I think some people struggle to tell the doctor the whole truth, even during an in-person meeting, and so that kind of very private and personal healthcare information, if people are skeptical of its security, it just won't work from a market standpoint.
And I think that's a really good point. And I think that as we talk to our clients, their security posture matters more to their clients than ever before. As at First Light, we're answering more audits and questionnaires that our customers are sending us to make sure that we're doing everything that we should be doing. Security is becoming a differentiator in many different industries.
Yes, absolutely. And it seems like it's top, well, before this year really got going, it seemed like security was top of mind, nationally and beyond. We have time for a couple of more questions, and we have a couple more here. So under this new normal, can you give some examples of how First Light has been able to help organizations, retool for this?
Yeah, so I can think of a couple good examples. I mentioned one earlier, which is, we really took a step back, really in earnest in the end of January, beginning of February, as our customers were making their plans on what the coming months would look like, and really prioritize how do we help our clients rapidly scale their infrastructure. So I talked about sort of boosting network capacity for customers that were already customers. The second example I can think of is we had a number of our customers, particularly in healthcare, that operated call centers or operated on call for providers of patient care, and they needed to move those resources from the hospital setting into a home setting. And so in addition to all the services I talked about today, we also have a number of telephony services, things like phone systems and hosted voice. And so we were able to work with a number of smaller healthcare providers to reroute the calls, still enable to from a HIPAA perspective, make sure all of those call center services were HIPAA compliant, and allow them to operate as if they were still in the office. And I think that, one of the trends that we saw in healthcare in general was people afraid to go to the hospital if they didn't have COVID. They might have needed to see a doctor, but they were afraid to. And so the extent that we could help enable our clients still have that conversation with their patients, still help those patients, and when necessary, advise those patients that they're better off coming into a hospital environment because they're suffering from something that could be a heart attack, et cetera. So by enabling that communication to take place as seamlessly as possible, and yet to the point of HIPAA, still meet all those obligations, that's something that we were really proud about. And it was something that we really took. We're a sizable organization. We operate one of the largest networks in the region, but we're also singularly obsessed with customer service. And we really felt like we needed to do whatever it took to keep our clients running, to keep them in business, and to enable them to service their customers.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, we have time for one more question, and I wish we had time for more, because this is fascinating and I think really important. And so sort of putting an emphasis on the importance of the discussion is, the idea that presumably every organization should have a fully functioning data recovery plan. But do they? Do you guys, from what you guys see, do they? And if they don't, why not? And is it insurmountable, say, for smaller organizations to have an in-depth full recovery plan?
I think that is something that has really changed over the last, I would say, 12 months. And that is, we used to talk to a lot of organizations about business continuity and disaster recovery. And generally, that was the first thing to be cut from the IT budget, because until an organization experienced an incident, there was a vision that this is an expensive insurance policy that I don't want to have to use. And I think three things changed in the last 12 months. One is more and more organizations are experiencing incidents. So as ransomware and as malware, whether it happens to you or you read about, the city of Atlanta that spent $20 million recovering from a ransomware incident because they didn't have the appropriate investments in business continuity, it's become more tangible. It's no longer worrying about the nuclear bomb. The second element is it's gotten a lot cheaper with cloud-based solutions. And the third element is it's gotten a lot easier as technology has emerged. So we have very cost-effective solutions for organizations small to large, but because of those three trends, that's what's driving the change so that more and more organizations embrace continuity.
All right, well, thank you, Aaron. I think that's a perfect note for us to end on. And I really appreciate you being here today. For those who might have joined shortly after I introduced Aaron, if there are folks out there who did, Aaron Sawchuk is the Senior Vice President of Data Center and Cloud for First Light. So again, Aaron, thank you. Fascinating and thought-provoking. Also, thank you to First Light for being a sponsor of this. And on behalf of New Hampshire Business Review, I thank all of our attendees for being here. This has been recorded and will be available on the website shortly. If you have colleagues you'd like to share it with, I know I got a message from somebody even as the webinar was going on saying they knew somebody who ought to see this because it was important. So anyway, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.